In 1968, Aurelio Pache, David Rockefeller, and Alexander King founded an organization they called the Club of Rome.
Founded by members of the great and the good, members of the, to use the conspiratorial terms, the globalist elite, who produce fatuous documents from time to time, echoing the various mantras and nostrums of socialism or communism at a particular moment.
The club floundered around for a few years trying to solve the problems of mankind. But then, in 1972, it revised an idea spawned by Thomas Malthus in 1798. Malthus was an English scholar who wrote a book entitled An Essay on the Principle of Population. Basically, the principle was this. Every time the human race invented a way to produce more food, it used the abundance to increase its population rather than improve its living standard. Thus, humanity never advanced like it could if a small elite were ruling a modestly populated world.
Malthusianism was, in a sense, a theory or a counsel of despair, that as people gained technological knowledge to produce more food, that would make them to a certain extent more healthy, and they could reproduce at a faster rate as opposed to dying off quickly. And the population would then expand, potentially geometrically, and this would outrun food production, and so you had this vicious circle which could never be corrected.
The club, using computers of the day to extrapolate not only population growth but resource depletion, came up with a twist on Malthus and published it in a book entitled The Limits to Growth. Like Report from Iron Mountain, Limits to Growth was also a bestseller. The twist was this. Human populations grew exponentially while food populations only grew linearly.
And the Malthusian population model, which is a simple equation, simply says that if there's enough resources, the population will go on doubling until there isn't enough resources.
In other words, the human race was going to run out of food and deplete its resources. This, the club warned, would lead to a sudden and uncontrollable decline in both population and industrial capacity by the year 2072. Very plausible, many thought. After all, when Malthus wrote Essay on the Principle of Population, the world population was only 800 million. Now, when the Club of Rome published Limits to Growth, the world population was 3.8 billion and still growing exponentially. Given that war could no longer be used as a unifying principle, perhaps the threats posed by overpopulation would fit the bill. This idea excited the power elite and initiated a UN conference in 1976 in Vancouver, Canada, known as Habitat 1.
This was the beginning of a series of meetings that they had at the UN starting clear back in the 1970s.
And this is where sustainable development was defined as human beings must not compromise the ability of future generations to meet their needs.
It was kind of an intellectual way of explaining why the world needed world government, because without world government, individual governments couldn't handle all of these really big problems that now needed to be solved on a global scale.